Hello, my name is Dawn, and this is my channel for my first service dog, General Lee, and I am currently at the very beginning stages of training my service dog, Prospect. I've had her for 6 weeks, so we are still in what I would consider the prospective stage, because we are still working on basic obedience, housebreaking, things like that. So once we actually get to a point where I feel that she is ready for training outside of pet-friendly areas, then I would consider her personally ready to be a service dog in training. But for right now, we are working on having a well-behaved pet before I move on to training her to be a service dog. That is just the training guides that I have followed, that I followed with General, and I intend to follow the same path with my second service dog, a boxer named Alexandra. And I would like to take this time, and I hope to do so each week, sharing some little snippets of some of the service dog pages that I help run to kind of address some of the major questions from that week. With the pages that I either run or help run, because I'm the sole administrator for 2 pages, and I'm a moderator on a 3rd. A big question that tends to come up usually involves housing, and particularly emotional support animals, but also for service dogs. So let's put a few minutes into a generalized breakdown of what to expect when trying to deal with renting a home with an assistance animal. Now, not all landlords fall under the Fair Housing Act, and I know that many people are actually surprised to learn that. For instance, I personally am a landlady. I and my husband rent out a duplex apartment, so only 2 units, and we collect the rent ourselves. We hire maintenance men ourselves if my husband actually can't fix something himself. So we do not use a property manager. So between the fact that we only have 2 units and we do not use a property manager, we do not fall under a Fair Housing Act. So therefore, if someone was to come to my rental and say that they have a service dog or an emotional support animal, one of the 2 assistance animals that would fall under the Fair Housing Act, I legally could say no. A lot of times landlords have been bitten by past negative experiences, and while it's not fair, that is the way things go. And as long as a landlord doesn't rent out 4 or more units while living in one of those 4 units, or if they don't use a property management, then they don't fall under the Fair Housing. Now, if they rent out 4 or more units and they do not live in the property, or even if they actually only rent out 2 units or 1 unit, but they use a property manager, then that would fall under the Fair Housing Act. That's a very simple way of explaining it. I would recommend going to the government websites, the Fair Housing Act, the HUD, the Housing for Urban and Development. I know I'm messing that up. I have really bad brain fog today. I've just really had a bad day. So, but look up the HUD page, and they should be able to locate from there any website, any information that they need regarding the Fair Housing Act and who falls under it and who does not. People hear HUD and they automatically assume that it means government housing. That's not the only thing the HUD does, okay? That is just one small portion of what they do. Now, if I was to actually fall under the Fair Housing Act, then there would only be a few minute reasons why I could then legally say no. For instance, there are different breeds that, while I cannot personally discriminate against, that does not stop my homeowner's insurance from discriminating against them. You can easily Google the top 10, 15 breeds that are usually on homeowners insurance breed ban lists. The top dogs tend to be, of course, pit bulls, which is it's because of the financial aspect of it. I know pit bulls can be absolutely lovely. I have some friends that have pit bulls. I love them. Unfortunately, when things go bad, the insurance companies have to look at the cost that they would then have to pay out for each claim. And unfortunately, because pit bulls do have one of the strongest bite force, that also means that should something go wrong, they can cause so much damage, as opposed to a dog that has the bite strength of, say, a Pomeranian. Yeah. So insurance is look at straight at the numbers, claims versus payout. So unfortunately, with pit bulls, whenever there is a claim that's put in, the payout for the insurance companies tends to be higher. The same is with German Shepherds, other large dogs. Now my service dog, he's only 30 pounds, but he is 50% German Shepherd. So when I got him for my own personal homeowner's insurance, I had to change policies because my old policy would not have covered him. Now, if I had been going to rent a place with my 30-pound, 50% German Shepherd mix, and by the way, the percentage really doesn't matter if there's a discernible amount in there and it's on the breed ban list, insurances can still say no. Which is why a lot of places actually request DNA tests now at some rentals, because people try to get around and say that their dog is a lab mix. Well, it may be a lab mix, but what is the lab mix with? But with my German Shepherd, I did have to change homeowners insurance policies. So if I had been renting, my landlord could have legally said no, because it would have been a financial burden for them to either have their homeowners insurance rates increased or canceled. So that is one thing to keep in mind whenever you rent. You may not get the breed that you want simply because insurance companies, like I said, they look at the bottom line, and not everyone who has a dog that they claim to be a service dog actually is trained to the level of being a service dog. So again, the dog owners who are responsible are put into a nasty little situation because of those who are not responsible. So just as a FYI, if you have not gotten your emotional support animal or service dog, and you're looking at renting, that is a issue that you need to factor in whenever you try to decide which animal or what breed would be best for you, because the financial burden is I guess some people would call it a loophole, but it really is one of the only ways that can protect a landlord whenever it comes to whether or not they can say yes or no for certain animals, because otherwise there's very little that they can do as long as you have your proper paperwork. Now, whenever I say paperwork in regards to service dogs, a lot of people are like, well, you don't need any paperwork. Okay, you don't need any paperwork for public access. Walmart, your grocery stores, even going to your doctor's office cannot ask you for registration, because federally there is 0 registrations that are recognized by federal law. There's hundreds, literally hundreds, and all of them have official and federal or the United States registry in their titles. All of those are bogus. They're not worth the paper that is printed on them. And if you look at the fine print, most of them do say somewhere in the paperwork that it's considered a novelty item, not to be used for access issues. So, but whenever it comes to housing, whenever I first got my German Shepherd mix, General, I did not put disabled. I did not have any mobility issues. I could get around just fine because, again, I had no issues that would prevent me from looking disabled at that time. So I could have been asked for a doctor's note for housing. So, and whenever I first got him, he was originally strictly for my PTSD. So I would have gotten a letter from my therapist, who was the one who was treating me at that time. Whenever it comes to disabilities that are obvious, like now, when I walk, my dog is off leash because of my mobility issues. And Alexandra, she will be big enough where she will be able to do momentum pull. So as she's older, now my disabilities are clear, that I'm disabled and that my service dog has been trained for my disabilities. More so as I train my younger one. So as long as the disability is, clear, if someone's using a mobility harness, it's pretty clear that that dog is a service dog because of an actual disability. People, most of the time, I know it happens, but most of the time they're not going to go out and buy a mobility harness for their pet. Now, sadly, a lot of service dog handlers do buy them without actually making sure that the harness is fitted properly to their dog. But that's a different issue. Now, you also need paperwork for your emotional support animal. And the paperwork would be whichever doctor or therapist is treating you for your mental health. Now, it can also be for your physical health, because physical health does affect your mental health. So if you are being treated by your neurologist because you have epilepsy, and while you don't want a service dog, you don't really believe that you require a service dog, but you would like to have an emotional support animal because it would help your mental health, then your neurologist could write that letter because they are aware of your mental health issues, because it coincides with your physical health. But so yeah, you would be required to hand over a letter from your doctor or therapist that helps treat you for your mental health. And now a big thing that I've seen lately are people who have multiple emotional support animals. Now this is whenever it gets a little tricky, especially whenever it comes to like multiple dogs, because especially as they get bigger, it can be considered more and more of an unreasonable request. Whereas 2 or 3 hamsters in a cage, it's not that big of a deal for most landlords. But if I have a 900 square foot apartment and you have 4 people who are living in that apartment, and now you want to have an emotional support animal for each individual in the household, that would be unreasonable because of the amount of living space per living being, whether it be human or dog or cat. That's where a lot of times people are like, but I need all of them. Okay, well, what does ESA 2 do that ESA 1 didn't do? Or is it because of cats? All right, yes. You can have 1 and 2 that they can switch off, because a lot of times cats won't cuddle at the same every single time. So you can cuddle with one while the other one is off doing its own thing. But if you have 4 dogs that you are trying to get labeled as your emotional support animals, it gets a lot trickier, because each animal really should be able to contribute to a separate portion of your therapeutic treatment. Again, for 2, you can kind of, you can be like, okay, well, this is for in case the other one is asleep or something like that. But 4, most of the time, that's going to come off as being an unreasonable request. Even four dogs in a 900 square foot apartment with just one person, that would still be a lot of potential wear and tear that would not have been there had there not been 4 dogs in the apartment. Now you add more people in there, and then that's just, again, it gets to be more of a cluster. I know some people have been able to get their doctors and landlords to agree to having a large number of emotional support animals, but it really is not the norm. And again, unreasonable is a very gray term. So even though you as a renter may consider it a reasonable request for 4 dogs, landlord most of the time, unless they are just like super pet friendly, 4 is really pushing it. It really is pushing it, and to the point where the landlord may even feel that they are being taken advantage of if they normally charge for each pet, as many landlords do. So just keep that in mind. Now remember, for emotional support animals, they do not have public access. So any place that's not already pet friendly, your emotional support animal cannot go to. That means no Walmart. That's the biggest place that it seems that ESAs are taken. They recently lost their rights to fly as service animals, whereas before 2020, they were able to fly as service animals because the terminology when flying was a lot looser for flying. But in 2020, it came out, and it took an effect in 2021, that airlines no longer have to permit an emotional support animal up in the air. Why? Well, this is because a lot of people took animals that were not trained, whether they were a real ESA or an animal that they just got paperwork bought online for, so that they can smuggle their pet on board. There were so many people who got bit. I mean, it's just not a good thing whenever you have untrained animals up at 30,000 feet. It also affected service dogs in training, because now service dogs in training no longer fit the DOT's definition for what can fly and what cannot. So whereas many people used to fly with their very young service dogs in training and would actually have them as service dogs in training, now they're forced to contemplate whether or not their dog legally fits the bill for a service dog, even if it's way young. And all handlers know that just because a dog is task trained doesn't mean that they're really ready to go to work full time, which is why we have the service dogs in training versus service dogs. It usually takes about 2 years for a dog to mentally and physically grow up. And for some dogs, it takes even 3, sometimes 4 years, depending on the breed. So, ESAs and flying, unfortunately, you're going to have to fly them as a pet. So if your dog or cat is small enough to fit into a small carrier to sit at your feet, the ESAs are good to go. But if not, they're going to have to fly cargo. And I know a lot of people don't like that, but that's where we are as a nation now, because so many people did abuse the system and that they did not take their animals training seriously. Excuse me. Um, Again, there's just so many stories of flight attendants and other individuals that got harmed by untrained ESAs. That's one of the reasons why they had to cut that out. You can look up the Federal Registry and or register rather, and you can type up service dogs flying or ESAs and flying, and you can usually find the paperwork where they spell out different reasons why they word things in different laws and why they chose to eliminate certain privileges such as with the ESAs. So this video is a little bit longer than I planned, especially for an introductory back. I did get a tripod, so I'm going to just try to start taping some of Alexandra's training sessions whenever we're out and about, and maybe even some of General's just out and about, some videos. And so I will try to do a video each Sunday. And like I said, I will just address the biggest questions that I've seen in the 3 pages that I help administrate or moderate on Facebook. And if anyone ever has any questions, you can just send it to me in my DMs, and I will be glad to answer them either privately or on a video like this without mentioning names, unless you want your name mentioned, of course. So that is it for right now. I hope to see you again very soon.